Hello, we want to have a discussion on one of the theories of social policy. This theory is called group theory. Previously, we looked at elite theory, in which we found that policy making is a process that is spearheaded by a few and privileged members of society, and whose aim is to come up with policies that favor them or that further their interests in politics, in business, and in other sectors. Today, we want to look at a different theory, which we call group theory, which basically says that policy-making process is driven by groups and not a select few in society as proposed by the elite theory. So in this discussion, we want to focus on four broader areas. First, we want to understand what is meant by group theory. We will then discuss some of the key arguments that are contained in this theory. After that, we will look at some of the factors or some of the characteristics that groups should have if they are to assert their authority and presence in the social policy making, so that their views constitute the policy. And lastly, we shall look at some of the weaknesses or criticisms that have been leveled against this theory. Group theory is foregrounded or developed within the context of the pluralist model of power or of politics, which essentially argues that power in society is widely distributed among different groups. A group is understood as a collection of individuals that, on the basis of shared interests, attitudes, and goals, may make claim upon other groups' society. This theory understands or considers society as a mosaic of groups which interact and compete for the authoritative allocation of values by the political system through policy formulation. Many public policies do reflect the activities of groups, and that groups in society try to influence public policy to its advantage at the policy formulation level. In short, this theory is based on the fact that what happens in society is driven by many people, and these people become more effective when they act as a group and not as individuals. For that reason, therefore, there's a tendency of members of society to approach issues affecting them as a group rather than as individuals, because as groups, they have a greater say, they have a greater push, and they can also raise the necessary power and resources to push their agenda in society. These groups, therefore, try as much as possible to ensure that they remain relevant and that they enjoy the fruits of what goes on in society. This one they do or they achieve by pushing their interests anytime a policy is being formulated, because resources, power, authority, and privileges in society are allocated or distributed in society through policies. And therefore, to ensure that they enjoy this, they ensure that they come together as groups and push their interests at the policy formulation level, so that the final policy product that comes out is one that reflects their needs, their interests, and places them at a better position to enjoy the resources and power that exist in society. Let's now look at some of the propositions or key arguments of this theory. Group theory views policymaking as a struggle for balance among the competing groups, and that what becomes a public policy is the equilibrium or compromise reached by the groups. In other words, what the theorists are telling us here is that each time a policy is being made, different groups that have different or have competing interests in the policy, they struggle to ensure that their views dominate the policy document. But this struggle will continue until they reach a point where each side feel that at least they have some significant say in what comes out in the policy. And that is what we call equilibrium, or what we call a compromise. So that what we see is a policy is nothing other than an agreement that has been reached by the different competing groups. That is an important proposition of the theory. The second proposition of the theory is that the equilibrium point continues to shift position as different groups manipulate these resources to get public policies to their favor, either singly or in concert with other groups that share common interests with them. In other words, an agreement that is reached today by different groups that are competing to have a say in the social policy might change in favor of one group or the other. And this is because from time to time, groups try as much as possible to manipulate the policy so that the policy can lean more towards their interest. And in that case, they work hard as much as they can to ensure that the position that's agreed on in any given policy from time to time is changed. And this one now comes through what we call policy review. From time to time, a policy might be reviewed to just see whether it's addressing the issues that was needed to address. And at that point of review, again, the competition comes in. So that a group that appear to have won at the initial stage of policy formulation may not exactly have the same strength, have the same goodwill from political players at the time when the same policy is now being reviewed. In that case, their win or victory at the initial stage might change against them, and therefore the side that lost previously might now become the victor. The third proposition of the theory is that the ability of the favored group to sustain its gain depends on its power to counteract the powers of the competing groups to tail decisions in their favor. In other words, if a policy document says something, whether that remains, it depends on the ability of the dominant group to sustain its gain. And not just sustaining its gains, but also ability to counteract the powers of the other groups that it vanquished at the stage of decision-making stage. The fourth proposition of the theory is that policymakers simply respond to group pressures, negotiating and compromising among competing demands of influential groups, and that power to dominate policy decision is dependent on group solidarity as well as power. In other words, the people who are in charge of policy making are not in themselves do not in themselves have powers to determine what eventually constitutes the policy, but rather what they do is to come up with a policy document that addresses the interests and the views of the various competing groups. So that what policymakers do is simply to negotiate and guide competing groups to reach a compromise, where now each side feels that at least they have a say in the policy document. Otherwise, that is essentially what the role of the policymakers is as far as this theory is concerned. I indicated earlier that this group also postulates that the success of group in asserting the authority in policy formulation and implementation is dependent upon certain characteristics within the group. So I want us to look at some of the factors that the theory considers as essential in making groups succeed in having the opinions and views entrenched in the social policy. One of the factors is wealth. This theory considers wealth as an essential factor in the success of groups in social policy formulation and implementation, because wealth is required or is an essential resource when it comes to the mobilization of stakeholders. Policy making and implementation is perceived essentially as a political process. And politics, as we know, involves a lot of expenditure in various areas: mobilization, buying opponents, organizing campaigns, among others. It means, therefore, that for a group to succeed in policy making, which we have agreed is akin to a political process, then it's inevitable for groups to have sufficient wealth. Therefore, groups that have enough resources to mobilize the public and decision makers can easily ensure that the policy document provisions is tilted in their favor, and that the outcome of the final policy document speaks to their views, speaks to their concerns, and also to their interests. So wealth becomes an important and essential feature that enhances the success of groups in social policy formulation. It also means that wealthy groups are better placed to assert their preferences in the final policy document because of the ability to use their wealth to influence the contents of the social policy. Those who have wealth can not only mobilize stakeholders, but might also have leverage over their competitors when it comes to even manipulating certain stakeholders, like elected leaders, to buying into their ideas and perspectives as far as policy making is concerned. So wealth is a critical factor in the success of groups when it comes to social policy formulation and development. The other factor that can contribute to the success of groups in their competition with other groups as far as social policy formulation is concerned is organizational skills. This refers to the ability of the group to focus on different tasks and use their time, energy, intellectual capacity to effectively and efficiently achieve the desired outcome. Organizational skills enable groups to mobilize critical stakeholders during policy formulation and implementation. For instance, the group that attempts to mobilize the public in order to push its ideas would have to be tactful in mainstreaming various interest groups such as women, youth, professional groups, and even in some cases, traditional rulers. It's therefore the view of this theory that the ability of the group to conceive of ideas and get people to subscribe to such ideas can lead to the tilting of policy decision in group's favor. This is only possible if there is a greater element of organizational skills. Indeed, the extent to which any entity, not necessarily groups, even an individual, succeed in pursuit of their goals, whether long-term or short-term, depends entirely on the level of organizational skills. Groups that are well organized in terms of their activities, in terms of their finances, in terms of the relationship they have built with other organizations and individuals, are better placed to have a better presence and to be more influential in matters that affect the public. We noted that a public policy is essentially a political process, which members of the public at various levels, whether legislative, civil society, government officials, professionals, and corporate, their views becomes important. And those who succeed in securing their views and winning them over have a greater chance of seeing that the final policy document speaks to their issues compared to the ones that are poor in terms of organization. So organizational skills is an important instrument and is important characteristic and a factor that is critical in the success of any group when it comes to policy formulation. The other factor that this theory proposes as being critical for the success of groups in their effort to influence social policy formulation is quality leadership. Leadership can be defined as the ability of an individual or group of individuals to influence and guide followers or other members of an organization. It involves making sound but difficult decisions, creating and articulating a clear vision, establishing achievable goals, and providing followers with the knowledge and tools necessary to achieve those goals. Quality leadership is critical in pushing groups' agenda during policy formulation and agenda setting in the policy process. The process, rather the presence of a strong and charismatic leadership in the group, can enable the group to successfully push its agenda through with relative ease. We have to agree that leadership is an important component of any group, and we cited it as one of the essential elements of any group. What makes it essential is the fact that it has the ability to set the direction the group takes. One of the directions will be in terms of the kind of decisions the group takes and the kind of influence the group has in society. So a strong leadership has the ability to create a rapport within the membership of the group and also create a good relation between the group and other sectors in society. These sectors become quite important and useful when a group is faced with a task such as social policy making. Leadership, therefore, becomes important because groups that have strong leadership are likely to have a greater influence, are likely to have a greater commitment of their membership, and also likely to have sufficient resources to run its affairs and also contribute to the society. All these, we have mentioned earlier, are critical in the success of the group. So leadership is paramount, and not only just any form of leadership, but quality leadership. So groups that have quality leadership are better placed to influence policy-making process because of the strong network that they develop with other stakeholders, the ability to raise sufficient resources that are required for mobilization during policy formulation and development, among other activities that the group might want to endeavor in. The other factor that group theory posits as being essential in the success of groups in social policy formulation is what they call mobilization ability. The term mobilization may refer to the process of bringing together stakeholders to assist in the delivery of resources needed for successful formulation and implementation of a social policy. Mobilization is considered as an attempt by groups to bring both human and non-human resources together to undertake social policy development. Groups that are well known and respected and have strong mobilization ability can succeed in pushing the agenda in policy formulation due to their strong bargaining skill. It is perceived in Kenya, for instance, that groups with greater connection with influential people in government and the private sector can easily have their policy proposals approved in the executive and legislature. It means, therefore, mobilization ability is critical because through mobilization, a group is able to assert its presence in the public space, and in doing so, it is able to be noticed and is also able to have a greater voice compared to their counterparts that are not as strong in mobilization ability as them. Groups therefore need to invest in mobilization, in networking, and in structures outside the group that can become an important source of social capital, so that when public engagement such as social policy formulation comes into play, then the group can easily mobilize the structures and the network that it has to help it push its agenda in the social policy formulation. This theory has faced certain criticisms. So I want us to focus on some of the criticisms that have been leveled against group theory. One of the criticisms is to do with ambiguity in terms of the definition and delineation of key concepts. These key concepts are two: group and interests. The theorists are accused for not clearly defining what they mean by the two concepts, that is, groups and interests. Some theorists or some proponents of this theory, such as Bentley, understands groups as a relation between men such as adding man to man, while others, such as two-man, understand groups as any collection of individuals who have some characteristics in common. Now, based on these two, it is quite difficult to understand in what sense is a concept group being understood or being used in this theory. In what context is the theorists inviting the readers and the intellectual community to understand the word group? Is it in the meaning of the term as provided by Berkeley, or is it in the meaning of the term as provided by Tuman, or is it both? Such ambiguity makes this theory weak because a theory needs to be precise in its definition of concepts. And indeed, concept development and definitions is one of the processes of developing a sound theory. So the fact that there is vagueness in terms of what the concept group is, and the term group here is a critical term because the theory revolves around group. So it would have been important for the theory to have a very clear, sound, and a straightforward definition of what the term group is, so that people are now able to see how well to delineate or explain the concept group is as far as policy formulation and implementation is concerned. So failure by this definition, rather by the theorists to clearly have to, or rather to clearly define the concept group, is indeed a weakness that perhaps the theorists never thought would undermine their effort to convince the public and intellectuals about how well a group can succeed or fail in pursuit of asserting its authority in social policy formulation. This theory has also been accused of having serious bias towards groups. While it is true that people may have a stronger bargaining power when they act as groups than when they act individually, this does not entirely mean that other players, such as individuals in society or individuals in groups, cannot be useful when it comes to policy formulation. We have seen, for instance, societies where individual efforts have been attributed to the success or failures of such societies. Most of the atrocities that society has witnessed in the world, such as wars, have actually been spearheaded by individuals at the exclusion of groups. And groups have been unable to overcome the strength of the individual and therefore avert human catastrophes. We cannot therefore rule out the power of the individual in society or in groups to influence decisions in their favor. We have seen quite a lot of this in undemocratic societies where a single individual, a single dictator, holds the entire country under his grip and decides what society does or what various groups or institutional structures in such countries do. It is quite common in dictatorial regimes. We can see what's happening in North Korea. Despite other groups existing, it is the president that decides most of the things. The same thing happens in other countries such as Swaziland, where King Mswati rules supreme and dictates what is to be done. So the fact that individuals also have the potential of tilting policy decisions, it is a serious weakness on this theory to completely ignore the voices of individuals and their roles in the success or failures of policy formulation. So the theory has been faulted for overglorifying the strength of groups at the expense of that of the individual, or completely ignoring the contributions of individual in the success of social policy development or its failure thereof. The other criticism that has been leveled against theory is that the theory has been faulted for assuming that governments are neutral towards competing groups in social policy making. While we agree that groups can push their agenda, the assumption is based on the fact that the groups will work without any external influence or support. Some groups can be strong and indeed, left alone, can do so much. But sometimes governments might be in favor of some groups and against others. And it might use covert means to strengthen or weaken the group that they perceive is either becoming too influential in policy making. So the fact that the theory is focusing more on groups at the expense of government and bureaucracies makes the theory looks weak, because the theory is not understanding the entire structures, the entire environment under which groups operate. Insisting that groups are strong and insisting only on the internal structures of the group, then the theory is having what we call a closed view of the group and totally ignoring external factors such as the government that might either weaken or strengthen the group depending on the kind of interest they have within the group. So the assumption that governments is neutral when it comes to competition that emerge between groups that are focusing on social policy formulation is completely wrong. Governments are never neutral. And indeed, they might be opposed to some groups, but they might support some groups. Anytime a public event or a public activity is in place, there will be always groups that support government and those that are opposed to government. And government will make all effort to bolster the strength or resources in groups that support them, and also use covert means to weaken those groups that appear to be critiquing them. So the assumption that government is always neutral towards competing groups when it comes to social policy formulation, that assumption is wrong, and it is one of the criticisms that critics have leveled against group theory of social policy. Kindly let us stop there.